Hi everyone, nice to meet you all. My name is Emily and then welcome to the workshop where we'll be talking about components in Figma. My helper today is Christina, so she'll be helping me out with answering any questions or comments that you guys might have. And then without further ado, let's jump into the workshop. Okay. So this is going to be our workshop today. We're going to be chatting about using components in Figma. And then, so before we start getting into the nitty-gritties of components, I'll start by giving a quick little introduction about myself. My name's Emily. I'm currently in my last year studying global business and digital arts here at Waterloo. And in the past, I've completed design internships at Wish and Shopify. After graduating, I'll be returning to Shopify for full-time as a UX designer. So the structure of this workshop, I'm hoping will be pretty interactive, where you'll be able to learn some concepts and then also follow along to build some button components with me. So we'll start with a brief little explanation about what components even are, the advantages of using them in our designs, and then how they can be scaled up into full-blown design systems. Then we'll get to move on into creating some button components together. You can either do this in your own Figma files or just follow along with this video. And then afterwards, we'll learn how to make different states of each button component with different variants. And then finally, we'll wrap up with some key takeaways and then tips and tricks on how we can use components to make our workflows better, how we can go about making better design systems, and then what you can do with these components in your hackathon projects. So also all of the assets and examples used today will be linked here at the bottom here and then at the very end as well. So with that being said, let's start with a bit of concept around design systems, which are basically just a cohesive set of the most basic building blocks that makes up a design. Some of you might have seen this before or not, that's all right. And so these components are called building blocks because they're made up of a set of components, which is what you'll be learning to make in today's workshop. These things will help us as designers work more efficiently and achieve consistent looks and feels through all of our designs. And then so to kind of help us understand it better, let's kind of see how they look like in action with an example instead of just talking about them theoretically. So here we just have a very basic standard checkout page. We'll be jumping into the actual file here where we can go ahead and edit this. And then so kind of just showing the usefulness of using components in our designs. So say, for example, for each of these forms, we wanted to make a different state of it. So normally without using components, we would have to like duplicate it, make each state for like if they're typing, if it's an error state. And then if we want to change something, if something gets messed up, then we have to go in and manually make all those edits. What we can do with components here is basically build out a little system here that lets us know everything that we have. So here we have our default state, we have our active state, which is when they're typing, and then an error state. So what we can do is say if we wanted to change all of these states into an error state, say for some reason like the person messed up, we can easily select it in here by clicking error state. This will all be reflected by this here. And then now if we want to make a change in all of our designs, we can easily do that in here. See if we want to change this color to like a light red. Just by making one change, we see that it gets reflected across all of our designs, which makes it a lot easier for us to go about making changes and not having to do it manually. And then, so that was a really quick example of how components and design systems go hand in hand, which had a bit more about that in a bit. I see there's a question about someone accessing the file. This will be sent out afterwards, so you guys can play around with it, make edits to it if you want. Just make sure to make a copy of it. And then, so, okay, digging a little bit deeper into the actual anatomy of a component. It's actually a lot more simple than it looks. A component is basically just, like we said, a building block that you can reuse across our designs with ease. And then, so a little definition of it is that it's just an element you can reuse across all your designs. As we dig a little bit deeper, we find that each component can have numerous variants of it. So these are defined by the properties of the variant, which are things such as like hover or disabled states, buttons with and without icons, and so on. So like in the example we saw before, if you want to change the background color of your text input component in the error state to red, you can simply do that by changing the properties of the master component, and then that change will be reflected across all of your designs. Okay. And then moving on to the next one. So here we'll start the sort of like more interactive part of it, where we'll get to make a component together. I think you'll get the most of this workshop by following along and building these out in your own Figma files along with me. So let's just start with building the most basic variation of a button component and then go from there. The most basic variation is a button in its primary state. And then, so basically jumping back into the actual file here, it's very easy to make a basic component. All you do is use your text layer. You can just press T and then just type, say like this is a button. So that would be your call to action. Just make this a little bit bigger so you can see it better. And then there's a lot of different ways to make a button component. I personally like to use auto layout, so I just press Shift A. This will make it into a frame itself, and then I can rename it. Oops. I can rename this. Oh no. Okay. I can rename this here on the side to say button, and then in its primary state. Okay. And then here we can just add a fill onto it. Say we wanted to make it like blue. We can just do that. Changeable radius. There's a lot of different ways to do this. You can also just do this by using a text layer and then a rectangle background and fill it with a different color. I personally like to use auto layout because, say, if we want to change this to like done or like proceed to next step, auto layout can just let us resize the button automatically on its own without us having to do it ourselves. And then so to turn this into a component, all we do is simply go up to here in the toolbar where we see this little diamond icon, or press Command Option K. Once you see in the layers panel that it has this little purple diamond icon here, we know that we've created a component. So there you go. There's your first main component. And then moving on to the next step, we'll be making variants. So variants are basically components with different states. And then here we have all of our variants for our buttons. So we have different button types for primary, secondary, and tertiary. And then for each of those button types, we have the default state, the hover state, disabled state, and state with or without icons. So I just built this out already just to make things easier and then just make things quicker. And then a key pointer here is that we want to make sure that each component we make is a master component of its own, meaning that the diamond icon here should be filled. So what we don't want is if we make a copy of this component, we see that it loses the diamond icon. And then in the layers panel, we also see that the diamond icon isn't filled out. So just to emphasize, this is not what we want. We want every component we make to have the filled in diamond icon. And then so once we have all of this done out, we simply just select all of our components. So this takes a little bit of manual work, but we just select them all. And then we see in this right-hand side panel, there's a button that says Combine as Variants. All we need to do is simply just click on that. And then there we go. We have our full set of button components. So now that we have this done and ready, we can take this on to our next slide. Here we will be learning to define the properties. This is where it gets a little bit more tricky and a little bit more tedious. So we'll start out by just renaming our properties. And then when we click into our set of components here, we see that on the right-hand side, we have an error banner that tells us that some variants have the same property values applied. Change the values of these to resolve this. This basically lets us know that right now our set of components is incorrect, and then there's some things that we need to edit. So a trick here is we can always refer to previously created design systems to help us sort of like name our properties easier and then have a reference. So kind of how we go about this is right here we see that it's already defined as primary, secondary, and tertiary buttons as our button type. So in the property 1, we can simply just change this name to type for the type of button that we have. And then we also need a different property for all of the states that we have. So if we click here, we add a new property. Here we want it to be the state. So this would be things that just like disabled, hovered, state, and then our default state. And then we also want our last property to be with icon or without icon. And then here we can just set that. Then all we do is we simply just go when to check each of these. Say this is a primary button in its default state, and then it's without an icon. So here we will want to change this to false. And then for a secondary button, we do the same thing. Without icon should be in false. Tertiary default state without icon. And then we just kind of go about with all of this. So here, kind of just to make things go a bit quicker, we have different types of buttons here, but the state is all in its hovered state. So state, we can go ahead and add a new one and have this value be hover. With icon should be false. And then this one, pretty much do the exact same thing here. Add a new state for our disabled state. Icon should be in false. And then lastly, this one here, it should be in its default state with an icon that should be true. So we actually want to change this to true. And then Figma actually does this pretty cool thing with Boolean values, which are basically if you just type in true or false or on and off, it will actually create a toggle switch in the actual panel. This saves like half a second of extra work when we design things, but it's a pretty nifty feature, I guess, to have. And then so all we really need to do right now is just double check that all of our things make sense. So this is all in its primary button state. This should all be in secondary button. And then this should all be a tertiary button here. Yeah. So then when we click on this main thing, we see that the error banner has disappeared. We see that we have our type, we have our state, and then we have with or without icon. Everything looks good to go. And then there we go. We have our set of button components along with all the variants. And now it's ready to go and we can go ahead and make our designs. And then so now we'll kind of just see in action, see how it works, see how we can use these buttons with the same low like checkout design that we had before. So simply all we really do is we go into the assets panel here. And then if we just type button, we'll see that we have all of our button components here. So we can easily just drag a button into here. And then here we'll see that we have this button here. We have another button here that we can do. And then we'll just kind of resize the text just to make sure that it fits a little bit better on the screen. We'll align this here. And then so this one we can do like proceed to next step. And then this one can be back. This one we'll probably want it to say like apply coupon code or something, just like that. And then now we can just see that we can really easily just go ahead and change all these different button components that we have. Say for back, we want this to be probably a tertiary button. And then proceed to next step, we probably want to be a primary button, but it should be in its disabled state because none of this information is filled out here. And then the apply button should be a secondary button. And then we can also see that we can easily like add or remove icons as well, just with this little toggle button, just like what we had before. So yeah, this makes it all very easy for us to go ahead and create consistency throughout all of our designs. Say, for example, we have like various different versions of the screen all throughout our page. Having these button components can make it actually very, very useful for us to make any changes and then also apply consistency and make things a bit more efficient. And then so moving on, we'll pass all these things that we did. And then moving on to the last little bit of key takeaways here. These are just some tips and tricks that you can use throughout. So tips and tricks is just make sure that when you're using or making your set of components that they're made up of components with the filled in diamond icon rather than instances, which are also components, but the diamond icon isn't filled in. So make sure to check the layers panel for that. And then another tip is always refer to a published design system or style guide, such as Apple's HDI guide or material.io. This can always help us with defining properties properly in a way that makes sense to both us and the system in general. And then some other benefits of using design systems is that it improves collaboration with our developers by allowing us to talk in the same language. So on the image here, we see an example, and then let's just kind of jump in to here again. So here on this image here, this is basically what a developer will see when they go ahead and use components or design systems that they've already set in place. And then what we can see is that when we have a button in here, and then we go into the inspect panel, we basically see the same thing as what our developers see. So we see that we have a button, and then it's in its primary state, default state, and false. And then so here, if we wanted to do a button with a primary state, icon is in false, and then its default state, this is the same thing that a developer would see. If we wanted to change this button to a secondary button with an icon in its hover state, oh, I guess I didn't do that state, but yeah, the developer would basically see the same thing. So it just kind of helps us create a common ground between us and developers, which overall helps us with our communication with them. Another benefit is that it establishes consistency throughout our designs, as you guys saw in the example. And then it also improves our workflow efficiency by reducing any manual changes that we need to do on each screen. So this kind of goes back to the example that we saw by changing the background color of a text input to red. And then lastly, design systems, making components and understanding the concepts behind the design system in general is a highly demand skill set that a lot of companies are actually looking for. A lot of bigger companies, they actually do have their own established design system. So it never hurts to kind of know how to navigate our way around that, how to use it. And then also if we know a little bit deeper about how to actually create them, we can also just help out those companies that we're looking for as well. And then lastly, we'll wrap up with any questions that you guys might have. I'll refer back to the Slido to see if there are any questions right now. Okay, so first question is, can you put components inside of a component? And the answer is yes, you can. So we'll go back to, there was the Figma community file for the Shopify design system. This is all linked as well. And then, okay, let's see how we can get this to show. I'm currently not showing that screen, but the short answer is yes, you can. So what you can basically do is a lot of times people will like have like a card component or something like that. And then inside the card component, there'll be like a button as well. So you can have components nested in components. It just gets a little bit more detailed. And then when you make sure to change things, make sure to change things in those nested components as well. So the short answer is yes, you can put components inside components. Next question is, what is the difference between auto layout and grouping elements? So Figma actually has a lot of really great tutorials on auto layout as well. Basically, how I kind of see is auto layout just kind of helps you resize and restructure things in a way that is very consistent, follows the same logic all throughout. So then say if you wanted to make a group of something here, so say you wanted to take your like checklist from over here and you want to make a checklist here to say like yes, and then say like no, and then say this could be like maybe. What you can do is here, if you select it all, you could group it and then it would group as that. Or if you just use auto, what is it called? Auto layout, sorry, yeah, if you just use auto layout, just press Command-Shift-A, then it'll resize it in a way that lets you just kind of change all of these properties and make it very like laid out in a way that is consistent all throughout. So that's the main difference between auto layout and grouping elements, I would say. Can I talk more about using auto layout to organize your designs for prototypes? So auto layout, I would say, just kind of frames everything a little bit nicer. When doing it for prototypes, it's pretty much the same thing as grouping it. I'm not sure if there's much of a difference when it comes to if you were to like link your prototypes, so that I'm not too sure about. Oh my gosh, okay. So I'm just reading through all the questions. And then the next question is, what types of skills and responsibilities would a UX designer have in the work field? So you definitely have a lot of hard skills and soft skills as well. The technical skills would definitely be to be able to use softwares like Figma, be able to maybe like create some illustrations if that's needed in your company, be able to work around with different like size constraints. So be able to design for like web, mobile, and tablet. Some soft skills would definitely be communication. So how you express your idea and your thinking to all the different stakeholders. The way that you would express something to a developer would be somewhat different from how you would show something to your project manager or another designer as well. There's also some like really great Medium articles on that we can link out as well afterwards that can explain this a little bit better. Next question, Figma or Adobe XD? I've seen people use both. I've also seen people use like InVision and Sketch as well. So far, from my personal experience, Figma has been the industry standard. It's what I used in both of my previous internships. So I would say, personally, I would vote Figma over Adobe XD. But then again, whichever you're comfortable with. And then another question is, when do we need to start building a design system? I am currently designing app with friends and we are still figuring out our branding and UI. So I would say you could always just start out with the most basic components in a design system. So if we just go home here, we can see, I think we'll jump into this Shopify's community design system. We can see that like in here, they have all their button components, action components, cards. This is also linked in the file as well, which I'll send out after. And then all of the rest of this here. So I would say you can always start by building a design system very early on, even before you've decided any of your UIs. You can even do this in like literally grayscale if you want. And then once you figure out the look and feel of the app that you would like, you can go in and then just make changes into your components. So say you wanted everything to be like a blue theme or like a blue gradient theme. Then once you have all of this in here, you can just change your components to a blue color. That way it just gets reflected in all of your designs later on. So yeah, I would say like maybe building it out earlier is a bit more helpful. And then any tips on how to easily convert a desktop design to mobile? So there's some set points that you should follow for like the sizing for a desktop versus a mobile design, and then just some like stacking logic that you can read online as well. So I'd say definitely refer to Material.io for that. What you can do to make it a little bit easier is a little tip and trick here is, say you wanted to like stack this. When you resize things on Figma, sometimes when you just like resize it like that, things can get a little bit wonky. Or if you just like go like that, things can get a little bit wonky. So if you want to resize things, if you press K and then resize it, everything will scale and resize together. So that is a little quick trick on how you can resize things a little bit easier from desktop to mobile. However, just make sure that when you resize it, there are still a lot of things that you have to manually go in and fix. Just because when you resize things and rescale things, you end up with like all these decimal points here, which isn't really best practice. And then, okay, another question. What are some things that you wish you learned earlier that made your work more efficient and faster? I would say a big thing is really just watching other people design. So it's a little bit like harder now that everything is remote, but Figma has really great office hours on YouTube. There's a lot of YouTube videos of people just designing, and then they have like two cameras so you can see their screen and then also like how their fingers are moving on their keyboard. So then you also get to learn all of the hotkeys that go along with it. And then also really just doing things. So what I used to do was I would just go on like Dribble. I would find a design that I think looks really nice. This was to help improve my UI skills. And then I would just like copy it and then like just completely try to redesign it like from scratch. Of course, like after you copy it, don't post it or like share it anywhere for like plagiarism's sake. But yeah, it's just a really good way to kind of like get you to follow up and like design all these like new design trends and then learn how to do that. So definitely I would say watch other people design things as well as just do things yourself. And then next question, what are your favorite resources or online courses to help learn Figma on your own as a beginner or full-time student in a non-design major. Figma's YouTube definitely stands out. There's also a lot of other designers out there. I know there's a TikToker named Design Lily, and then someone named Mesh Times. They do some really cool things as well. Also just Medium blogs, following the Shopify community profiles for any like design inspiration. And then Figma actually has its community files that you can just like duplicate or play around with. Those are also really helpful in just kind of like getting your hands dirty and then learning the basics of things. Yeah, any favorite Figma plugins? I would say definitely remove BG, which is like remove background. It basically just takes any image that you put in and then it removes the background for you and makes it into a PNG. So I find that's really helpful when you're trying to do mockups and things. So say for example, if you're trying to make like an e-commerce app and then you take a photo of like a lamp, but it has like a background in it and you don't want that, you can always just use that plugin. It removes the background and then you can use that image without a background. So yeah, that was it for the workshop. I'll be sticking around on Discord afterwards to answer any questions or anything that you guys might have. I'll also be sharing out this link here. And then there's also some additional resources at the very end. These are either like recordings or blogs from Figma that you can read to learn a bit more. And then these are the two Shopify community files that were used in this workshop. And then also linking a Nelson and Norman group article on design systems just for more context. So yeah, thank you all for attending and enjoy hacking.